I'm your host, Annie Bowles, and this is News du Jour. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the News du Jour, a calmer space to consume the news. So I did want to share with you guys that I have been diagnosed with a more serious overarching condition beyond gastroparesis. So I am not quite ready to talk about all this, but if you have listened to my gastroparesis episode, then you know everything that I've gone through with that condition. And the doctors right away at the top told me that gastroparesis can be a sort of a symptom of larger conditions. And so I always felt that I had certain symptoms that came on at the same time as gastroparesis, but weren't really related. And this diagnosis, while it is frustrating that to have another condition to tackle, it also explains a lot and it's nothing life-threatening. So it's good to know what was causing a lot of those other symptoms and what has been causing me even more symptoms since I gave birth. So anyway, long story short, it's a good thing, and I will definitely be sharing more about it soon. Yeah, so just wanted to get that out of the way here at the top, but I also will probably be talking about it more on my personal page on Instagram, which is at It's Annie Bowles, if you guys don't already follow it. And so that's a great place to find out more about my sort of behind the scenes life and what's going on with me versus here on the podcast. And Sugar Free Media is going to be putting out some bigger projects coming this fall. And I am so excited, you guys. We have some really impactful stories we're going to tell. And yeah, I know that they're going to make a big difference for some of you. So I'm just really pumped to be producing some bigger projects. Anyway, stay tuned for all that. And with that, we'll jump into the news for today. So first up, a quick update about the submersible case, the submersible vessel that went missing. So obviously this situation is evolving minute to minute. So it's actually tough for me to keep you guys posted accurately via this podcast. But as of, Tuesday night, Central Time, search teams actually heard some underwater sounds that they believe to have been related to the lost vessel. The ship is actually now being referred to as the Titan, which was apparently its name. But obviously, it's a little confusing because it's called the Titan and it's going down to visit the Titanic. So I'm sure that was like some sort of a play on words, but it ends up being a little confusing, but we'll just call it the Titan from here on out. A report has also come out alleging that the company, OceanGate, had actually been cutting corners when it comes to safety on this particular vessel, the Titan. Basically, it had not been certified by any marine groups or experts, and experts had actually been critical of its design. People were just so desperate to go down and get a look at the Titanic way at the bottom of the ocean that this company decided to make it happen by whatever means possible. And that may have meant putting their passengers at risk. Keep in mind, by the time that this episode airs, the passengers are in their last few hours of oxygen, if they have even made it this long. I'm praying that these search crews can locate them and get them out safely, or that they've somehow come to the surface to get more air. But either way, it's going to be a tough, journey, because even if they are at the surface, they have limited amounts of food and the sun becomes a factor. sharks. I mean, that's a very real thing. I know people are like, oh, sharks, but no, like I've listened to podcast episodes about sharks in the open water when there's been other like ship crashes. So it's definitely a very real threat, and there's a lot of obstacles. But again, I wish I had more to tell you guys about. I wish there were more updates, but we are going to do everything we can to keep you guys posted. Let's keep the prayers going, because there's not more that we can do sitting here on the outside. For our next story, I did want to issue a content warning. This story involves sexual violence. So Andrew Tate has been charged with rape. This online personality, Andrew Tate, who self-identifies as a misogynist, has now unsurprisingly been charged with rape in Romania. As we all know, violence against women and misogyny go hand in hand. If you don't respect a woman, you aren't likely to respect her bodily autonomy or her boundaries. Andrew Tate has been under house arrest just outside the capital of Romania. He is obviously an antagonistic character with a need for attention, but now he's going to be getting a lot of it and not under his control on his own platform. He was charged with both human trafficking and rape, as well as establishing a criminal ring that proliferated the abuse of women. His brother and 2 women were also arrested in connection to this larger scheme. You see, Andrew Tate and his younger brother, Tristan Tate, are British Americans who are known for kickboxing. But they moved to Romania because it has a reputation for being somewhat lawless. They deliberately set up their lives there so as to avoid accountability for crimes against women. They have said as much on their show. Quote, "I like living in a society where my money, my influence, and my power mean that I am not below or beholden to any laws." End quote. Woof. But as it turns out, Romania does not actually like its reputation for being lawless, and they do actually have laws that citizens are beholden to there. So now they're enforcing them, even against the powerful Tate brothers. LOL. And next up, a content warning for this story. It involves police brutality and racially motivated violence. So a report reveals longstanding racism and illegal policing in the Minneapolis Police Department. So I don't know if you guys remember, but following the horrific murder of George Floyd that we all witnessed as a country, the Justice Department vowed to look into the policing practices in Minneapolis. And well, guys, they did actually follow through on this exhaustively. They have published a scathing 90-page report that details all their findings of this investigation. And let me tell you guys, they are heartbreaking. Let's go over a few of these revelations bullet point style. So, first up, the Minneapolis Police Department was found to have discriminated against Black people, but also Indigenous people. Derek Chauvin, the man who was convicted of murdering George Floyd in broad daylight, had also used excessive force before and was not reprimanded. This is why he likely felt that that day he could act with impunity. The report also found that this police force has discriminated against handicapped people and people who needed mental health assistance. They routinely dismissed people's health complaints generally. They routinely violated people's rights while training new recruits. This blew my mind because it really sets the tone for how the new police officers were to react when a person was being violated in front of them. And again, we saw that impunity in Derek Chauvin's eyes, but we also saw how those other sort of lower ranking officers were taking a back seat and just letting Derek Chauvin do what he wanted to do. And I think this is what led to that part. The entire process for reporting complaints against the police was deeply flawed as per this investigation, and their investigations of their own officers were often left unfinished. So basically, there was zero accountability for their bad behavior, allowing it to run rampant and essentially create a toxic work environment. This is how situations can go from one or two bad apples, as people like to say, to an organization of rotting fruit. It is such a slippery slope. And in situations like this, good people feel that they can't speak up, and they will often leave an organization because they are helpless to change it. I do want to give you guys a look at a couple different specific stories that really paint the picture of what these bad practices mean in real life terms. Let's jump in. So first up, we talked about how the report found that people were denied medical care. So as an example of this, there was a woman who was being arrested who let the officers know that she was a type 1 diabetic and that she could not see straight in the back of the cop car. She repeated, I need help, and asked twice to see a doctor. By the time that they got to the jail, the woman was limp in the back of the squad car. They dragged the woman out and laid her down on the concrete. The officer reportedly knelt over her and said, quote, just so we're clear, since you're playing games, I'm going to add another charge for obstruction, okay? You're going to spend even more time in the clink, end quote. I shudder to think what she went through that day as a person with a chronic illness myself, and something like that could have genuinely killed her. Secondly, we talked about how the police essentially had no consequences for their violent behavior and had been breaking the laws themselves. There was one officer who back in 2014 was seen on surveillance video basically responding to a retail theft call, and he could be seen on that surveillance video punching a man repeatedly in the face when the man's hands were handcuffed behind his back. But the quote-unquote investigation of this incident where he used excessive force didn't even review the videotape. This officer then went on to commit 76 excessive force incidents from March 2016 to June 2016. In the same, I don't even know. That's not even 6 months, guys. 76 excessive force incidents from March 2016 to June 2016. I had to repeat that because that just blows my mind, including one where he caused a traumatic brain injury to a man who he kicked in the face repeatedly when he was on his hands and knees. The man also suffered a displaced nasal bone and sued the police department. The officer was convicted of assault, and the police department settled for $150,000. Situations like this really beg the question, when did the police become the criminals? Another police officer was found to have remained on active duty on the police force for 2 years after 10 different complaints of unlawful search and seizure. He abused his position for those 2 whole years, taking cash and looking for illegal drugs for his own use. All of these stories really add up to a police force fraught with corruption. My heart broke reading these stories and thinking of all the people on the other end of this violence who were helpless to stop it. Unfortunately, a lot of police forces around the country operate like this with absolute impunity. And if it wasn't for what happened to George Floyd, we never would have had this investigation to call out this ridiculous behavior. This report called for a complete overhaul of the Minneapolis Police Department. Something else that actually came out of this report following the death of George Floyd was that the officers only tracked gender and race in their reporting 35% of the time after George Floyd. It was 71% before, And to me, this tells us that they were still trying to cover up their bad behavior, and they were likely acting in the exact same way they always had been. They weren't interested in change. So now they're out of a job. And you know what? It seems like Minneapolis will be better for it. And that is the news du jour. Today, I wanted to leave you guys with the quote, "Women are like butterflies. We may look pretty and delicate, but baby, we can fly through a hurricane." If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use to listen. A rate and review or shout out on social media would mean the world to us and help us be able to keep creating the news du jour. But the best way to support all of our work is to become a patron at www.patreon.com/sugarfreemedia. You can also follow us on social media under sugarfreemedia.co on Instagram and just sugarfreemedia, all one word, on TikTok. We appreciate you listening and look forward to telling you about the news again next time on News du Jour.
Broadcasting from Oklahoma.